Well, hi. Today we're talking about DECT NR+, the latest member of the family of DECT standards, and also the world's first non-cellular 5G technology. Today I'm talking with Christian Satter of Nordic Semiconductor. And Christian, perhaps you can kick us off by telling us a little bit about what you do at Nordic.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that. Yeah, so that's true. I'm based in Nordic headquarter office in Trondheim, in Norway, and I've been in Nordic since 2019. And my current role in Nordic is to be our product manager for cellular IoT and now also for DECT. So I have the overall product responsibility for everything we do around cellular and DECT technologies, basically.
Fantastic. Well, Nordic Semiconductor are developing a first generation of a DECT NR+ chip. What made you take the decision to start this development?
Yeah, so we can say that initially and very shortly that when we saw this and started looking into it, it was well ahead of the definition itself and the overall specification being set. So what we saw was here is a prospect basically for a single global band radio specification with very strong radio specification and capabilities. Mm-hmm. And we really did see that didn't really exist today across all available technologies. And Nordic is a company that's focusing on low power wireless, and we started with very proprietary things a long time ago, but Nordic as a company, we focusing on open standard, and we really like open standard because we think that that's the only way to build very robust and big ecosystem with very low risk for end customers. And of course we like to be leading on that technology, but we think that open standard lead to competition, and competition in the end brings the best solutions out there. When we saw DECT, we saw the prospect for that as well, right? That not only something that was single global band that don't really exist today for many standard, maybe except 2.4 gigahertz, mm-hmm. but with very different capabilities. But we saw that, okay, here is the ability to bring and make an open standard as well for that. And then later on, diving in a bit, we saw that Nordic as a company, we are very strong on radio technologies. And here we have the opportunity to influence really and drive at least the lower radio layers that we like to really focus on. I think we are strong on in the radio standard. So I think that's how you can say it started in Nordic.
Okay.
And then seeing that physical and lower MAC layer where we have focused our effort materialize into a full specification, that's roughly when we said that, hey, this looks really interesting and the prospect here is great. So we took a decision to productize when we saw, I think, two things. We saw the specification of DECT 2020 or DECT NR+ and what it can bring. And we saw that we have in-house, we have capabilities and we have building blocks that are so that it makes it possible for us to realize a product here in a reasonable time frame with reasonable resources.
Well, what do you think are the critical factors needed to bring success for NR+, and also what do you think are the hurdles that have to be overcome before it becomes an established IoT technology?
Yeah, so I think if you look at where DECT NR+ is today, I think the fact that we have a global band that is available in most of the world is very, very good and already there. And you mentioned initially that here we have something that has been approved by ITU as a 5G standard, and I think that has already brought DECT NR a long way, and we see that from the interest in the market. But if you look at something becoming an established technology, I think you need several things. I think we need to see the first proven solution and practical implementation coming into the market in a reasonable time frame, and that is, of course, our focus. And we need to develop references for testing, for certification. There's a lot of groundwork that still have to be done for it to become established. And I think that beyond that, it needs to become an ecosystem around the technology. I don't believe in technology being big and mature with only a few players. There must be an ecosystem on hardware providers. There must be an ecosystem on solution providers. And I think on top of the DECT 2020 NR as a radio technology, there must be diversity in the solutions to establish it. And you know that we are partnering with Wirepass today, and we are promoting Wirepass as the solution providers for the initial solution. But beyond that, I think there must be diversity in solution providers that can help accommodate for various type of solutions. There's not a, we don't believe there's a single radio standard or a single solution that is there to rule them all. And there's so many use cases in IoT and within DECT 2020 NR as well, we see that there's many different use cases that would be different type of solution optimizations along the way. And I think that is the, should we say, hurdles to overcome. And the other thing that we're focusing on, and I think is important in the first step, is to teach the world about the technology. As a new radio standard, and as a radio standard that is in some way more complex than many of the ISM and license accept standards today, I think there's a lot of work to be done to explain to the world why DECT 2020 is so promising and what the technology is, to ensure that people understand that and see the foundation around that technology for how it can be used.
Well, the first generation of your chipset is going to be focused on the IoT market. And of course, in that market, Bluetooth is a dominant technology, and Nordic has a major share in the Bluetooth marketplace. What's your view on DECT NR Plus when comparing with Bluetooth? What are the pros and cons, and will the two technologies be able to coexist within IoT?
Yeah, I think the short answer to your last question there is yes, definitely. We, as I mentioned, there is not a single radio technology that can solve all use cases in IoT.
No.
You know, Nordic is, you know, as you say, we are huge on Bluetooth Low Energy and 2.4 gigahertz radio technology today. And we went into cellular IoT 3 years ago because we saw that as the next big wave. And as you may know or followed, we started and took Wi-Fi into our portfolio last year because we saw that there is a big use cases for Wi-Fi. So we think that you need a set of technologies or radio technologies to really support all IoT standards. But if you come back to kind of the foundation of this, that Bluetooth Low Energy today is a very dominant technology in consumer.
Yes.
And in, should we say, consumer building and consumer use cases. Bluetooth Low Energy audio is kind of coming up now as the big new thing in audio.
Indeed.
For consumer and maybe hearing aid and other technologies. But then if you look at DECT NR Plus and as a competing or a compelling technology next to Bluetooth Low Energy, we see that as a much more industrial radio standard initially.
Right.
So not really interfering or competing with Bluetooth Low Energy directly. If you look at 2.4 gigahertz and Bluetooth Low Energy is not really established in many industrial use cases today, while the initial interest that we have seen for DECT NR Plus is really in industrial, smart city where you need long range, you need outdoor, something very, very reliable with higher bandwidth, utility metering, and these type of application. Building automation where you have the promises with DECT that you can go from wired networking to wireless networking and still achieve latency and reliability as a wired network. And so we see really DECT NR Plus and BLE fitting into kind of different markets, I would say, initially at least.
Well, of course, Thread is another mesh networking technology. What are your views on Thread?
Yeah, we see Thread as very, very interesting technology, but maybe falling a little bit back to that it's 2.4 gigahertz based on top of Bluetooth Low Energy today and very focused against or towards consumer home automation type of products and towards use cases that typically have, I would say, some hundreds of nodes, maybe up to a few thousands as a kind of best case. But with that few thousand, you're going to be very limited in how much traffic you can have on a Thread network inherently because of its bandwidth. Thread is also consumer-oriented in the sense that users typically authorize devices in the network and add them to the network as a home network or as a home automation network and so on.
Yes.
And I think Thread is extremely promising in that sense. And you see Matter now becoming as the hopefully kind of global ecosystem standard on top of Thread that can unify, smart home and smart building and smart consumer, I would say, in that sense. If you then compare that to DECT NR+, so DECT NR+, is defined and promises to go to much higher number of devices in network. Not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in huge network, because of how it's defined and how it's scaled to go to much higher bandwidth. And I think that DECT as a mesh technology is inherently, I'm not sure what I should call it, but a bit more loosely defined on the network layer, how it's done. Yes. But that brings the ability for the application layer to define tighter or specific meshing rules, authentication rules, provisioning rules, and other things. So I think that with DECT NR, you will see, as for meshing technologies and for mesh, that you're going to see an ecosystem built on top of that can bring much stronger capabilities for application that need much bigger networks where you don't necessarily want to authorize each device because that's cumbersome. You need some type of self-provisioning in the network, and you build stronger security around self-provisioning and so on.
So what would you say it's going to take, or what's required to ensure that DECT NR+ becomes a successful technology? And I'm including for applications other than IoT. What's Nordic doing and planning to do to make this adoption for other applications happen, for example?
Yeah, I would say initially that we are very IoT focused initially in the company, overall, but also for DECT NR+. We see that as the big opportunity with DECT NR+ initially, at least from our perspective and looking at the capabilities of our devices. We make what we call constrained devices. We make SoCs where we integrate application processor and memory and everything for the user application, and that inherently become very IoT focused due to the single capabilities of those devices. I strongly believe that being adopted as the first non-cellular technology for 5G is a very important step for DECT NR+. Yes. And you look at the capabilities that it has for massive machine type communication and ultra low latency type of communication. I think inherently it becomes a very strong technology in IoT. If you then look beyond IoT, I think audio is very interesting and becoming a very interesting use case for DECT NR+ also. As you know, Nordic has no legacy play in DECT, so we don't do any legacy DECT and we're not present in anywhere there, but we definitely see that DECT NR+ brings new capabilities to audio with regard to especially latency and reliability, but also bandwidth at some point, where it can scale to much, much higher bandwidth than legacy DECT can do. But our first solutions will be IoT focused, and then I think we can say that from a Nordic perspective, we are opportunistic in the audio space to see and kind of follow what is the initial requirement for audio and versus what we can do. Our initial solution will not scale to many megabits of bandwidth, so we can support kind of, should we say, lower end type or semi-professional or smaller audio networks with our first initial solution. So I guess that's a secondary market for us if you look beyond IoT for DECT NR+.
And can you see into the future, Christian? Do you have a vision for where DECT NR+ will be in 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think high level, we have big visions and big hope for NR+. Mm-hmm. We will not productize. We will not choose to productize on this unless we believe it's going to be a really big and important technology. But going back to where we see, as I said initially, if you look at the capabilities of DECT as a radio technology, there is clearly that there's no other license accept technology that have this level of capabilities. No. If you look at latency, reliability, the ability to scale to a very large network with up to kilometers of range between each devices. You can look at other technologies today and you find pieces of this, but you can't find a single technology that can do all this. And I think that's going to be important because I think if you look at many IoT deployments today, they are, you can say, they are simple devices. There could be parking sensor, temperature monitors, and things like that. If you look at smart city deployments, you're starting to see street lighting becoming really an interesting aspect in deployments, where you definitely need high reliability. You need fairly long range. You want to have fairly long range. You want to have build big networks so that you don't need to put a lot of gateways or sync nodes there, and you don't need to build a big infrastructure around it. Mm-hmm. And I see beyond that if you look at some of these more basic use cases today, in the future, you would need to have more bandwidth in those use cases, because you need to have the ability to update those devices. You need to have the ability to onboard them, to offload them, to do security provisioning on them,
yes,
to do firmware updates. And I think there DECT NR+ bring capabilities in security and bandwidth that some of the existing technology doesn't bring, and can make them scale from being, some city test project or some campus test project into really big commercial projects that scales across cities or campus or even regions when you look at the capabilities of DECT. So that's where I see that it can become really big in the future. And I think it's important to realize that when you have open standards like DECT NR+ is, you allow everyone to come in and help build the ecosystem. And I think that's going to be important. And I think that being open, I think DECT NR can be really big, because then you will attract people that want to make hardware and software and solutions. And they can do that by addressing and contributing to an open standard.
Well, I've personally watched Nordic Semiconductor drive success for a number of wireless technologies, Christian, and I think it's extremely good news for DECT, the DECT forum, and the whole DECT ecosystem that you're part of this project. I hope we have plenty more opportunities to talk together as we work forward to take DECT NR+ to market. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was very good and interesting to talk to you, and hopefully we can talk some more in the future and maybe dive into some more details around it than we can have time for today, I think.
Yep, that sounds
why we think DECT is such an interesting technology for some of the more specific use cases we see going forward.
Let's plan to do that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.